people for joining. I mean, it's Monday evening, well, depending on where you're viewing on, or from, I should say. Thank you for joining us today. You've spent, taking the time out, taking an hour with us. So hopefully we can give you guys some gems, and some tips and stuff you might know already, or hopefully stuff to refine what you're doing. So yeah, my name is Kieron Lewis. I'm a freelance graphic designer, based in London, tell from the accent. And yeah, I mean, I will go into a bit more detail about career and, and whatnot, but just a bit of an overview. I mean, I went freelance officially 2 years ago, so just before pandemic, and I'm very much still learning, but it's been a bit of a snowball effect. We've been able to work with different clients, and almost be quite selective really of who I operate and work with. So hopefully I can give you guys some advice. And like Sam said, honestly, this is hopefully as casual as it can be. I know we're on Zoom and there's cameras off and it's all very, but I'm not a serious person. I am at certain points, but in this context, we're very much chilled, or very much, we'd like to, help out as much as we can. So any questions, please put in the chat, and throw it in there. And I don't mind the occasional curveball as well. I'm just saying, you can throw some curveballs at me. I'll try and answer if best, but yeah, please do throw anything if you've got anything that I can help out with. And that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. So yeah, I guess the first kind of subject we were going to cover was building a professional network and finding clients. So I guess the first question would be, what approaches have you found most helpful when contacting potential collaborators and clients?
Well, I'd be curious to know what people think in the group, but for myself personally, the way clients have approached over the past probably even year is so different to how I ever, operate before. So what I mean by that is things like social media. So a bit of context, I work with a lot of publishers. So people like Penguin, Harper Collins, small brands, right? That I work with, which is cool. But funny enough, the creative director of Penguin reached out by DM on Instagram, which seems like a wild thing, but actually it probably makes the most sense, because actually that's probably the most easiest way you can actually contact me, to be fair. You can email me, of course, but I'm very active on social, and then they dropped me an email and then we ended up doing some work together. So in terms of kind of working with clients, it's kind of organically happened, but a lot of it's happened via social media. I don't know if anyone else had any experience with that, but I thought that was quite useful. And also something quite not as intimidating when it is via social media. Is that maybe it's just me, but I don't know, if I get like a DM and it's just like, they're interested about work, we take it on via a Zoom and we talk more, but it doesn't feel so formal maybe at that initial stage when it is by a DM or a LinkedIn message. It feels a bit more softer maybe. Usually there's a few emojis dashed in as well, sprinkled in, which I'm a sucker to an emoji. So to be fair, it doesn't take much to make me happy if I see like a smiley face at the end of it. This person seems cool, so we can work together. So yeah, a lot of my clients has kind of happened via social media and that way as well. So it's been quite nice.
Cool. Yeah. And so what, to get, I guess, into the nitty-gritty of it, like what kind of wording do you use in your messages? Do you kind of, yeah, I guess, how long do you make it?
Yeah, do you know what I always find? And it's funny because I used to be the king of faff. And if anyone doesn't know what faff means, basically just adding extra jargon for the sake of it, which I've got a PhD in that. And I've learned over the years to just simplify and make things easier. And what I mean by that is if I'm approaching a client or I'm emailing, half of the time I'll write down what I think, and half of the time I'll go through it and just actually delete a lot of it because it's so much jargon that you don't necessarily need. That initial stage of, reaching out to a client or a client reaching out to you, for me, I try and limit the amount of email communications because I want to quite quickly go on a Zoom, especially if they're abroad. Obviously we can't meet in person, but if it's say, abroad, which most of my clients are, we'll have to have a Zoom call. And I'd rather us have a half an hour Zoom call than back and forth emails at that initial stage, so that they get to know who I am. I get to feel for who they are. And also I think that's quite important because I mean, once you got that kind of energy there and you get the vibe of the person who you're working with, especially when it's like a long project, like a very meaty brief, it's important to both be on that same page, that same wavelength at the very initial stage. I think for me, that's been a lot of the ways I've operated and got clients where we ended up having a very good energy, good vibe at that initial stage briefing, very transparent from the get-go. I'm not that kind of guy to pretend I can do something if I can't do it. Do you feel what I mean? I'll just be very honest. And that plays a lot of point because I would generally think you'll get found out one way or another, to be fair. And we've all kind of done it every now and again, kind of blagged it to say you can maybe do a certain program if you can't and you learn as you go along. But for me, it's always been a case of if I don't know, I can try and find the answer, but I don't want to waste my time as well as their own. So I want to make sure that if they approach me, it's something that I feel very confident in. Editorial is obviously my thing. So yeah, I tend to be more comfortable in that. I can see a hand pop up emoji on the chat. I'm just saying that. I was like, yay, people talking. Cool.
Yeah, I was going to say, Gabe, did you want to unmute and ask a question?
Yes, actually. So say that you've got your client and you've got your general idea of what they want you to work on. How do you exactly work off of discussing ideas? What would you say that would be the best way to discuss building a deadline and sorry, that's my dog, and building building a deadline, building off the idea and working out a plan to execute it?
I've got two questions, one from you, one from your dog, I think. I don't know, it was like a crossover. So were you kind of asking like, I'm so sorry, can you simplify it again, actually? Not, I don't want to get it wrong. Can you say again, just to, what it was, a bit unclear.
Okay, so say you've got your client and you're able to start communicating with each other. How exactly would you say is the best way to start building off of the idea that they want you to work off of? How would you build your deadline? How would you build your essential game plan in a way?
No, yeah, that's a solid question, actually. Yeah, no, I get that. For me, once we've had that initial call, which could be easily from a half hour to probably an hour usually, which sounds like a long time, but actually when you've kind of gone through, the dynamics of, what you're about, what the project's about, time can kind of go off. I will always do like a deliverable breakdown. And what I mean by that is once we've had our call, we've said our goodbyes, usually I'll type up everything that I've had in terms of notes and from that meeting, or I'll be writing down stuff as we speak. And in those notes will be pretty much a solid, as solid as it can be, a breakdown of everything within that project. And that will include the timings, which obviously hopefully works alongside their schedule too. So I'd always ask firsthand, what is their deadline? If it's, say, for example, a book, which I work a lot in editorial, there's always a print deadline of some sort on how we get things out there. So I kind of work backwards from that. So I'll create almost like the deliverable breakdown, really. Break it down in terms of timings, in terms of, how many concepts can they expect from me on my part. But also, how do we go about doing feedback and amends? Because one thing I've realized, and I'm sure we'll talk about more on, is when feedback and amends come through, especially when it's a new client, it can be frustrating on a client, especially if they might put an amend out or feedback and it doesn't get digested well by the designer, or you do it in a way that you think was right, but actually it wasn't what they were thinking. Or and that's happened to everyone. That's happened to me, of course. I think I don't imagine no one's not had that experience before. But what I try to do is that when I say, for example, send like a concept to review, I would always ask for, again, a Zoom call. If we can have like a share screen, and in that way I can actually give them my rationale as to why I've designed what I've designed, and give them a real, a rationale as to why we've done, but also hear their amends and feedback straight from their mouth. Because I don't know if anyone agrees with me, but if amends and feedback come via email or via annotated PDF, it's so easy to get lost in translation sometimes. And that it can be quite, if it's like a copy change or, change a color from here to there, pretty piss easy, right? But there's been times where I guess it's more when you really pick the brains of the client of exactly what they want, especially in certain particular feedback, you can get a lot more from a conversation than you can via an email. So I always put these little not tricks, I guess, but just things that work for me. I'd always put that in the breakdown deliverable, which is at the very initial stage of us talking, pretty much after we've come off our first phone call. And I think they feel more comfortable in that way as well, because then they see something tangible, i.e. the breakdown, they can kind of revert back to it, which is separate to like an agreement, i.e. like a contract, for example. That's obviously more belt and brace, but with the deliverable breakdown, it's a bit more, it can be via an email, which is what I tend to do. I keep it in an email, color code it as well occasionally. I'll just put it out there, which I think works quite easy. It's easy for me as well, how I see things. It seems very going back to school, but it sounds weird, but like my brain has to work in that format sometimes. If I see it, if the header's bold and everything else is regular, I can easily differentiate. And I assume the client hopefully feels the same way, and they can quickly go through an email and be like, oh, okay, cool. That's Kieron's budget. That's the time frame. That's the concepts amounts I want to get. And then we kind of work from that as much as possible. So yeah, I mean, that was a very long-winded answer, but hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of how I kind of tend to work with clients, especially at that very early initial stage. So yeah. Hopefully answers the question.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Definitely like following stuff up after a call in writing for peace of mind for both of you, isn't it? So you both agreed on exactly what you're going to do.
But even for yourself, like, I don't know if you guys have this, like, only my brain works in a weird way where I could have a chat with you for 2 hours. After that call's done, I'll be like, that was a great chat, but what did we really talk about? Do you know what I mean? And I almost need to have it written down. And I think it's just how I've operated since I was in school, to be honest. Once I write it down, or even I'm talking to a client for the very first time, I'm listening, of course, I'm digesting everything they're saying, but I have my notepad and I'm doing little scamps as I'm going along, because in my mind, I already, not going too far off, because obviously I'm listening, and you can't listen if you're doing stuff, of course, but you're able to multitask, and I can multitask okay-ish. So I tend to be writing down, and like I said, once I've stepped away from the computer and we've said our goodbyes, I'll type up a really thorough deliverable breakdown, and that's what's under the client. And usually they'll agree if they're happy with that, and then obviously I send the agreement, which is what they sign. So both parties are happy, and then it's all systems go, really. I say it's like it's so smooth, as if every client's like that, but every now and again you get, like, you know, hiccups, but you have to kind of ride the wave now of how it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Christelle's asking, do you know what artworks catch the attention of like potential clients and stuff? I mean, I guess, does that depend if you're emailing someone or if you're DMing them? Do you send them like specific projects? Do you send them your website? What do you
well, usually, I mean, with the DMs, I mean, I mentioned at the very beginning, that's obviously a way that clients do reach out now, but it's to a point where it's cool that they come in via DM, but we will definitely take it on to email, because there's certain things you can't, I mean, I guess it's more professional that way, but also it feels a bit more structured when it is via email. And to be fair, I mean, that initial point of contact is social media, because it's easy, and then usually we'll take it on to email. And then that's when I can add attachments, or add, the deliverable breakdown as well within the email, so it's a bit more easier for them to view it. With concepts, I mean, it depends, because with editorial, well, any design work, but I have very like high-res imagery to work with. So you can imagine sending, I don't know, like a 500 meg or whatever it is email, it wouldn't work. So you have to send via WeTransfer, which I love WeTransfer for that, because you can see when they've downloaded it, which is a bit ninja-like. But do you know what I mean? Like, in occasion you'll send like an email to a client and be like, oh, when are we going to get back to me? And then you'll get like a, like automated response from WeTransfer. It's like, downloaded at 3 a.m. Like, what are they still doing up? But yeah, each client's different, each to their own. And I find that happens a lot because of my clients are based in the US and the UK. The time difference is a massive factor, which it's difficult in times, because the time difference is, obviously you need to be super sharp when sometimes the times are wrong. But I found a way to kind of make it work as much as possible in the past 2 years, and yeah, can't complain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So what can students and grads do right now to start building their professional network?
What can I do right? I mean, to be fair, being at these kind of events, like even just the fact that you guys have joined in and just listening, I think it's important to almost just digest everything around you as much as possible, whether it's going to events, having Zoom events, like when it's a free Zoom event, and you could be, obviously I don't know what you guys are doing because your camera's off, but you could be chilling, drink a glass of wine, but at least that way you feel like you're still being proactive, because you're listening to creatives discuss their viewpoints on on how we operate in our industry. And I think that's important to kind of know what other people are up to as well. Try and go into events is super important. I try to go, time winning, of course, as many events as possible. And yeah, I mean, it is tricky as well, because I always find as well with social media, it's good and bad, because it's very easy to kind of get a bit of imposter syndrome, which we all get, right? And I would be lying to you guys if I said that. Obviously, I'm quite active on social media, so I post quite a bit. But I'm always really conscious of that middle ground between how much you post, like posting what you need to post, and then being annoying, if you know what I mean, because no one wants a kind of not goody two shoes, but no one wants that one guy who's just, oh, hey guys, look at me, like all shiny, and it's just, I find that cringe in myself in general. So I generally, like, I hear myself talking sometimes, even now I hear myself talking. It's almost like okay, what I'm saying, is it actually of value? Does it actually make sense? Do you know what I mean? So there's times when I almost take a self-reflection, what I'm actually posting online on social media, or what on my website, for example. Do I need it on there? Does it actually reflect the best of who I am, if that makes sense? or was it just access, is it just extra waffle for the sake of it? And like I said, I was the king of waffle, especially during university, where I just had everything on there because I felt like I needed to. Do you know what I mean? Like, you just have, how many projects do you have on your website? I need to have 12. It's like, do you need 12, or you could just have like a solid 6, I don't know, but I didn't know if anyone else has the same sort of dilemma, but I definitely had that growing up. And I think over time, you just kind of refined yourself, don't you? Just a bit more experience, and I've worked at a few different places as the years have gone on. So I've kind of learned every place I've been at throughout.
And did you message people for portfolio feedback and mentorship, as well as, I guess it's like building those relationships, isn't it, before you kind of just email straight off the bat, like, have you got a job?
Yeah, please employ me. Please.
Building the network up. Like, how did you kind of approach that as you were studying?
Do you know what? I'm going to give you guys an example of, and this is generally God's honest truth, what happened. So when I was at uni, it was my second year, there was a guy called Patrick Miles. He was an incredible designer and art director, and at the time he worked for a magazine company. And I remember when I graduated, and obviously, so I had a job after uni, so I was quite fortunate to have that. But in particular, I really wanted to get into editorial. Like, getting into editorial, anything magazine related, is so difficult. I found that at the time when I graduated, because unless you know someone in that space, you can't. You can, but it's difficult. I found it difficult anyway. And when Patrick came to visit our uni as a guest lecturer, when I graduated, I remember emailing him, or I think I dropped him on LinkedIn actually, and I was like, because I made a book for my final major uni project, I wanted to share it with him just to get his perspective on it, not to look for a job, just because I knew he was active in the industry. I know he's got obviously a wealth of experience, and I'm just curious to know what he thought of my actual project. And we met up, and I think I must have been like, what, 21? No, I was older than that, maybe like 22, 23. And super nervous. Obviously, this guy's like super, established, knows his stuff. There's me rocking up with my massive portfolio, like already and, shiny and whatnot. And I didn't know what to expect. And we ended up having like dinner, having a super good chat. And I realized, actually, do you know what it was? He's just a very, very genuine, chilled guy. And once I started to kind of put aside the fact that I'm looking for a job, or, what could come out of this, and just see it from a perspective of, okay, we're looking at work, we're discussing work, and also I want to know what he's up to, and almost putting aside that facade and actually going in there just to see, as a genuine human being, that made it so much easier for us to connect and vibe. And weirdly enough, we're going back now 11 years ago, and we've stayed in touch ever since. And weirdly enough, actually, a few weeks ago, I'm actually doing some work with a person that he worked with from recommendation via him. But even prior to that, he's shared some work my way before in the past, and we've just stayed in touch. And this all stemmed off from me just having that chat with him and, showing him stuff and not looking for a job, just generally curious to know what a seasoned, I guess, designer was done in the industry and what they think of my work as well. And then I think, once you break it down like that and just have a genuine chat, you'd be surprised how much the doors open up. And for me, I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to do that. And like I said, he's a very great guy. So that's one example of how it could happen. And I was very active when I left uni. Like, I would share work out with loads of platforms and blogs and creative blogs. And when I think back to it, like, I guess I kind of had like bearing in mind, this was like 11 years ago. So like, I've definitely changed much. The beard's grown, that's for one. But a lot of things have changed since then. But I think when I graduated from uni, I remember thinking, right, shit, I need to be active, even though I've got a job. How am I going to get to where I need to get to, all these things? And I thought, once I kind of took a step back from this massive, 5-6 year plan I'm trying to really conceive, just try to not think for tomorrow, but be pragmatic and be realistic of what is actually achievable in this period now, right? We'll talk a bit more as we go into it, I'm sure, but my CV, if you see it, it's so sporadic in terms of job hopping, which I always say I wasn't proud of it, but at the time I wasn't proud of it, of course, but now I look back, I'm like, I'm glad I did that, because I needed to kind of go to a few different places to know what worked for me. And I definitely gone like a long way around to answer that question, but hopefully that answers a little bit of what you guys
absolutely. Yeah. So like personal branding and networking, those words kind of, I don't know about you, I always find them a bit cringe sounding. Yeah. I think now, like, when I graduated, there was no social media, there was no LinkedIn, it was very much who you know. It's kind of like your housemate's aunt who worked in an agency somewhere,
Grandma Karen, yeah, it's true.
Yeah, so Yeah, how can you utilize social media to grow your network?
I think the key is just to know what works best for you, because I think there's a lot of obviously you get your main ones, your Instagrams, your LinkedIn, Twitter. I mean, even TikTok, to be fair, let's be honest, that's people are active on there as well, which I'm not even on TikTok. My brain hasn't even come to that. It's like an old fuddy duddy. But for me, I found like being active on LinkedIn and Instagram has worked for me a lot. Instagram, in terms of, I guess you could be quite, I don't want to say quite quick with it, but I guess if you go on my Instagram, for example, I post, because I give a lot of talks at schools and universities, I'm discussing about that, or anything to do with stuff with Adobe, which I do some stuff with Adobe as well. So I might push stuff through that way, and obviously it's visual because Instagram, so it's easy to do that. But with LinkedIn, I guess I use LinkedIn as more of a more meatier thing to discuss. So for example, if I'm working on a project, and the Still Breathing project, which we'll probably touch on in a minute, I will probably have that up as a I guess case study up via LinkedIn, because I know LinkedIn now you can do things where you can have like featured articles on your feed, which really helps a lot. So like having a bit more standout project showcased. So that's what I tend to use it for a bit more. But also I found a few jobs on LinkedIn as well. Like I've had a few people reach out on LinkedIn DMs. Like I said, Instagram and LinkedIn has been kind of my holy grail of using it. That's because it works well for me. I think I definitely have Twitter, but I'm not active on Twitter. And I thought to myself, do you know what? Does it make sense to have it for the sake of it? And I don't know. I mean, I still have it, but I'm not active on it. I probably will delete it eventually. But yeah, for me, it's always a case of utilizing what works best for you and not just having it for the sake of it. Yeah, I don't know what everyone else thinks on that front, but it feels like a full-time job as well. When you're a freelancer and you have social media, you think, shit, I should be posting every day, or I should be active. And it's like, how can I be active if I'm working? Do you know what I mean? Like, it is a bit of a, I've had this chat with so many mates of mine and freelancers, and it is a full-time job in itself. Like, stepping back and thinking, right, I need to now set 2 hours aside to talk about it on social media or LinkedIn or show engagement. And it's hard. But I guess over time, you just kind of, you refine and you get better at it as the more you do it, right? Like anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess a lot of people use Instagram as almost like a mini portfolio in some ways, don't they?
Yeah.
To sort of showcase what you're working on and, your skill sets and stuff. But yeah, and it's very easy to fall into that trap of thinking, you go on Instagram sometimes and you see everybody succeeding. Everyone's doing more than you, no matter how much you post. But it's just, as you say, it's posting as much as you can.
But you know what as well? It's weird because like it's kind of like Black Mirror-ish. Well, not Black Mirror-ish, but I feel like everyone puts the shiniest things on social media. I mean, I do this. We all do it. Let's not even like be around the bush. And like I feel like with your social media, like it needs to be a certain level, obviously, right? Because that's how you want the world to see you, and that's what you project out there. But I guess hopefully I think a lot of people tend to see it. They kind of see through the bullshit quite quickly sometimes. I mean, when I give talks at school, especially like to 15-year-olds, they see through bullshit mad quick. So I feel like if they can see through it, then we hopefully can as well. And I think the reason why I'm saying is because it's all good putting the best of your best on social media, but I get a lot more out of going to events and having events, and speaking to people as well. Because I think you can get a lot out of the individual, not just the work they do as well. Which for me it's a package. It needs to come in, who you are as a person, but also how you work and operate. It needs to be the yin to the yang. So yeah.
Cool. So in terms of putting value to your work, what do you look for in a new client or a new project?
What do I look for in a new project? Something that's interesting. I mean, that's like an obvious one, right? And I think just to be clear, like it's one of those ones where sometimes you've got to make ends meet, you've got to pay the bills, you've got to pay more, whatever your life situation is, that's key, right? And I think I'm in a position at the moment with certain publishers in particular where you can be quite selective with who you work with. And not to say, oh, I don't want to work with them, it's fine, but it's more if it's a project that you feel like it's not 100% for you, by saying no, will they not ever come back to you? And I've had opportunities where that's a project come my way and I'm like, it's just not really a fit for how I operate. It's just not, do you know what I mean? But more so as well, it's just not within my skill set. I can try and learn as I go along. I'm sure I could, but why would I want to add that pressure to my, do you know what I mean? So, it'd be a different situation if I needed this job in order to pay the mortgage or whatever. But when you're in a position where you can keep yourself financially afloat, then you're in a sweet spot where you can be a bit selective with clients, but also work with clients who align with your values, right? And align with what you want to be operating with. And I mean, a lot of my work, and I'm sure we'll have a look on the website in a minute as well, it touches heavily on my work on the community, on race, on design as well. And it's funny because I generally didn't think that would be the space I would be operating in, like, especially when graduating. Like, editorial was my thing and I knew I wanted to get into it, but working on books that touches on the Black community or touches on, you know, different cultures and race and design and all these things together, a lot of the books that I do, it encompasses those things. And I generally didn't think that would be the space, but when clients approach now, it usually touches on those subjects. So for me, that's like a kind of like a job done, because the key needs to be when clients approach you based on what you want them to approach you on, if that makes sense. So yeah, I can't complain on that front. Yeah. I see loads of hands popping out. That's a good sign. People listening. Because I never know when no one listening. It's like, yeah, that's a good sign.
Anita, do you want to go for it? Unmute.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was looking at your website earlier today, and I see some of the projects that you worked on behind you. I was wondering about the Harper Collins one, and like how that kind of came about, because it was one of the ones that like stood out to me the most. That and the body one, I really like that one. Yeah, I was like curious about how that came about.
Yeah, of course. I can see Sam strategically got it up on the split screen, so perfect. That is what you call team effort. Yeah, it's nice to show you guys. You can visually see it whilst I'm talking about it. So this project came about with Harper Collins. So if we go back now, 2 years, yeah, 2 years, because it was the first time I started. This was my first freelance gig 2 years ago when I started. So it came about, I had a friend of mine who we worked together on a project, and she also works at Harper Collins, and she recommended me to the team. The team reached out to myself to work on this publication. Now, at the time, bearing in mind I've just gone freelance, and I didn't know the full extent of what this book would be about, but also how much it would be. It's a 300-page hardback publication, right? Now, I'll put it out there. I've worked on books before, never of that scale. I mean, that is, when you got an InDesign, you can imagine the endless scroll of, obviously you have it in sections, but there's a lot of moving plates and moving parts. So yeah, if we go back 2 years ago, I was approached by Harper Collins. There's myself, 2 other people that I worked with in the team, obviously much bigger team, but just us 2 in particular. We worked for free, and I would get content sent over to me. You got a load of different assets happening at one stage. You can imagine you've got 100 people featured, and each person featured has different quality of imagery. Can you imagine how much of a pain that would? For any designer, having 100 assets coming your way, and you've got super high res or super low res, and you need to find that, and that in itself will stress you out. I mean, I feel stressed thinking about it even now, but at the time it was stressful. And I think what helped me not pull my hair out was that I had a bit of a system in place, which was, I actually went back to old school. I went to Excel spread. I used an Excel spread of all of every single person featured. I think I broke it into like groups of 20 just for sanity, because 100 people obviously had a lot on Excel. So I had it down to 20 groups of 20, and I kind of broke it into the ones that were super high res that requires not much editing. Ones where they were just so bad that it's not salvageable. We need to get, a resend. And ones where it's not impossible to edit. I can definitely edit it and do some, Photoshop love to it to make it work. If we can get a resend, perfect. But if not, it's not the end of the world. And I kind of broke it in that section, because my brain thought, if I just go back to Harper Collins and say 100 people sent me stuff and each 100 assets is terrible, go back to them, it'd just be a nightmare. And at the time, because it was during COVID as well, we couldn't do a photo shoot. So usually we would have like, staged for consistency and look and feel, one big photo shoot or 2-day photo shoot. But it's all via COVID, right? So people were in different parts of the world, because there's 100 people from different backgrounds, all from the UK, but from different backgrounds in terms of industry. So some people might have been on tour, some people were, in Parliament active. People have things to do, right? People are busy. So trying to pin them down to send stuff was difficult, but we got past that hurdle. And actually, what I tried to do to make it a little bit more easier on myself was that and there's a rationale too, but the book itself is very typographic. So if you see the editorial spread, you'll realize that it's not heavily featured on the imagery. And I say that, and massive full bleed imagery there. There we go. That's a good example of not so much. And I did that for the sheer fact that for some injuries, it's great, it worked. But with the typographic, bearing in mind the context of what this book's about, this book, you know, is featuring 100 people, 100 Black creatives, individuals, and not just creatives, who are sharing their lived experiences of racism in their industry. Now, if I made a book just full of pretty pictures or great imagery, it would almost dilute what that content is about. So for me, it was important that, you know, if we're going to go on a typographic route, it's because we're pulling out key parts in that box, in that context, right? So then obviously you hopefully read it and you digest it. But when you read those kind of key pulled out typographic quotes, you kind of get a feel for it before you really dive into what exactly you're reading, which is kind of what I wanted to do. And then finally, another thing which is quite important to flag is that, you know, when you're doing a 300-page book, you know, that's a lot of pages, right? The thing I was keen to do, and the thing that I was explaining to the Harper Collins team, which I was quite, you know, very active on doing, was that every person featured has their own bespoke spread. So there's not a case of, I mean, the easy thing to do was have everyone having a, you know, fairly, you know, straightforward look and feel throughout the entire book. But it made sense to have everyone different for the sheer fact that everyone's experience of racism, even though it is racism and it underlines everything, it's a different experience, right? So it kind of needs to reflect design-wise how that looks. Hope that makes sense. So that's kind of why each person has their own unique spread, which you can imagine after the first, 60, your brain goes a little bit numb, trying to think of different ways of how it could look and editorialize. But I had to have a lot of, you know, stepping away from the screen, you know, going out. My wife kept me sane because it was a stressful project. But without a doubt, this was one of those projects that it will be in my portfolio forever. And I'm very grateful to be part of something like this, because now that it's been printed and it's in shops and it's doing its thing, we're still actively having discussions based on it as well. And there's like, they're having book groups, a lot of book groups as well, sometimes in the US as well, which are quite nice. But it feels like it's bigger than just you, if that makes sense, right? It's not just something that you design in your bedroom and then you don't see it ever again. It's the fact that you were part of something bigger than yourself, and it's actively got legs now, even though we've finished and we've gone to print, right? And it's the conversation's continuing on. So for me, that felt amazing to be part of that experience. And even discussing it with you guys now, it felt like it would always have a place in my heart. Without a doubt, this Still Breathing book. And even now I'm working on a book touching on race. But again, this was the first real meaty project I worked on as a freelancer. So I'm glad that you picked that on out. So yeah. A lot of rambling on my part. I apologize. I hope it wasn't too much, but yeah.
No, that's great. I was going to actually ask. The next question was sort of, you know, when you, what kind of things do you consider when you're pulling a quote together for a new project, especially if it's a client you've not worked for before? And you know, you were just touching on there about the legs of a project, like what's going to happen after you finished, the potential PR that comes after that.
Do you know what? That is it's a tricky one, but also something that within time you get better at it. And what I mean by that, and I'll give you an example, is that I've been freelancing for 2 years, right, actively. But before that, I was in full-time and I worked at various places. The one thing I was super keen to do is that when I left my full-time to go into freelance, I had a lot of mates who were freelancing. So I tapped into them and spoke to them about how do they charge, how do they deal with tricky clients, because I'm jumping into a space where it feels like a sink or swim situation, right? I just bought my first place with my wife, gone to freelance in a pandemic. It seems a bit not crazy, but sometimes the safer option would be to keep it full time because you know it's consistent and all these things. But I kind of picked the brains of a lot of friends who are freelance to find out, you know, how they operate, how they charge, and how they operate. And the thing that works for me, and I realize, is that I try not to. I don't want to over deliver, but I'm going to make sure that I can deliver what they're expecting, and that will reflect the quote as well and the cost. So obviously you have different levels. You have junior, midweight, senior, whatever creatives, and when it comes down to thinking of a quote of how much it will woo, I kind of base it down on either a day rate, but usually like a fixed amount of days, and think how long it would take me to do. But also I factor in as well, you know, feedback and amends, because with a book like Still Breathing, you know, we're usually, actually, let's go back. We're Still Breathing and Harper Collins, usually they tend to have a budget already. So it's a tricky one because they will come there with like cool, this is it. Can you do it? Yes or no? If not, we'll go somewhere else. Sometimes that can be like that. And going back 2 years ago, with a project like this was my first, you know, freelance project. So I was super keen to want to do it without a doubt. And it's like saying, well, it doesn't matter what the cost, I'll just do it. The price was good, but I think it was more knowing that this is my first project that I'll work as a freelance. If I do it well and do it good, hopefully it will stem off more projects. And I kind of had that mentality throughout. So I was very a bit more flexible than I probably would be with other clients, because I knew that, well, I never knew, but I hoped that this would be a project that would spare more on, and actually if we do a good job and we vibe well, we come back and we do more projects together. And that's when you can kind of challenge with the price, and you can actually, be a bit more, obviously you charge fairly, but obviously to a point where you feel like you're being justified for what you do. Nothing worse than undercharging, right? Which is horrible. And that to be fair, that happens. Sometimes you don't need it to happen, but sometimes, that classic case of if something bad happens to you, then you know how to move forward, going forward, if that makes sense. So then you can look out for it and you know what you want wrong. So then you can go through situations like that. So I feel like that's important to kind of go through the situations, and to go through good situations and bad ones, to then realize what you need to do moving forward. Yeah. I see a question there from Anika.
Yeah, Anika's asking, oh, by the way, did you want to go through another project? Well, did you want me to show it?
Well, actually, the body one was actually quite interesting. Was it, who mentioned the first was Still Breathing? I'm rubbish with names.
It was me, Anita.
There we go. It was you. You just popped out of nowhere. I didn't even see. That's just like a green outline. That's you. Yeah, you mentioned body as well. I mean, we can touch on body briefly, because actually body is almost like a 360, because obviously I mentioned the Still Breathing was obviously with Harper Collins, and this body book is also Harper Collins. But the difference is body, I mean, that came out, when did that come out? My brain. That came out last year. Yeah, late last year. So it was almost like Still Breathing was the very first project, and like a year and a half later we're still doing work, which was quite nice. But the difference is that the guys at Harper Collins, and that the ones in particular that I work with, they know me now and I know them. So there's already quite a good dynamic and a good vibe. And the one thing I love about, in particular with Harper Collins, because I work with them quite often, is that I'm not afraid to challenge them. And what I mean by that's not me being difficult or anything like that, but I think when you have a new client for the very first time, and as a designer, you might see something, you might hear something in terms of their process that they envisioned, and you're thinking, in yourself as a designer, that's not going to work, but you kind of just soften the blow and you kind of just go with it, because you think, well, they're clients, so they want it like this, so you got to do it that way. But with the opportunity that I have now, Harper Collins and other brands that I'm more regular with, is that they trust my experience now, that if I see something that might not work before we even designed it, I can question them on it. And it's not like, oh shit, should I said that, in case they're going to go somewhere else. But hopefully they value what I say, and that transparency is there from the get-go. So with the body publication, that was actually a lot more streamlined in terms of the process, because, well, for one, it wasn't as big as a book of Still Breathing, and plus this book, in terms of look and feel, is more consistent, because Still Breathing, obviously every page was different, so that's a lot of back and forth and concepts. This was similar, a lot of concepts, but nowhere near as much as Still Breathing. So but I guess with this book, it had a bit more of a promo to it as well. I mean, you guys can see there, you've got like a few celebrities that it had as well, and it was cool. I mean, it's a weird experience when you do book launch as well. Like, obviously David Beckham wasn't there. I'll just put it out there now for any disclaimers. But it was cool to go to. I've been to a few book launches, and this one was in it was in Soho, and I went there, and I remember I didn't know anyone there except for the HarperCollins team, right? And I remember going there thinking, oh bloody hell, I'll go there, but I'm kind of nervous to talk to them, but it'd be quite cool. You never know. And it was amazing meeting all the people there, everyone interacting with the book, and people talking about the design of it. And I think it was, again, it's nice to see your work, I should say, in context and actually off the press. Like, it's one thing to design for hours and days, but when you see it printed and it's amazing. I'm sure you guys can vouch for that as well. It's a cool thing, and seeing people interact with your design as well. It was a cool thing to do. So yeah, Body was another cool book to work on for sure.
And did this project have a budget as well? Just touching on Annika's question. So does Kieron price his work when working with a new client when they don't, how do you price it when they don't give you a budget? And if they say yes to your quote, does it ever feel like you're underselling yourself, underpricing it?
That's so funny. That's such a true thing. Do you know what? That can happen easily, where you think, okay, obviously we should always charge fairly, just put it out there. I mean, we're not monsters, but when you put it out there and you think, oh, they haven't questioned it, why should I have gone more? Like, it goes through your mind, like, and anyone says it don't go through your mind, they're lying, because it does. Let's be honest, and I'd be the same. But I think for the answer to Anika's question, if they haven't approached me and said, right, okay, this is our budget X, Y, Z, I have my day rate of what I know I can do and what I can deliver in terms of that. And usually I don't with a book project in particular, a book project tends to never be, well, it ranges, depends on the scope of the project, but with the projects that I work on, they're quite meaty jobs. So on average, I could do a book easily in the next 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks would be just, I do other projects on top of that, but that will be in the background as well as a project. So I will charge a fixed fee for that period of time. And I'll put that in the agreement of exactly how much it will be. And then alongside it will be the day rate as well. So then we know if we go over that, then that's what we do. But this is where, going back to the original, we spoke about at the very beginning of the stream, where the deliverable breakdown is so important, because what I write in that breakdown deliverable is pretty much a skeleton for how the process should be. That's not to say that's the holy grail, that is only it, because you've got to be flexible, right? It's the nature of the job. But I think when both parties have something tangible to see and to look at, and you can refer back to it and think, okay, cool, so we're in that part of the process. So I know when I send this to Kieron, he's expecting me to have a Zoom call with him 2 days from now to discuss it. And there's something in place. So for me, I kind of have to work that way. And I can kind of gauge when we're in a project and we're, say, halfway through, how are we kind of, let me start again. If we're in a project and we're halfway through, I can know roughly, based on that conversation we've had, are we going to basically make the deadline, if you know what I mean? And I never like to just let it run its course. If you can kind of see it's going on a path where they're unsure, and that's okay, because some clients are just unsure, I kind of, rather than wasting my own time and their time too, I almost have to like pick their brains more before any design work happens, and then kind of have a plan of, okay, well, they're going to need, rather than the remaining 10 days left, we need at least 15, right? And rather than just give them 15 at the end and say, surprise, here's an extra 5 days, you know, I put it forward to them in that call and say, you know, well, we're in a good place, but we're probably gonna need this X, Y, Z. And obviously that comes with a cost. And I think that's when you break it down and you have a rationale as to why you're going to charge more. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think that's smart, if anything, because then you don't undercharge yourself, like Nika said. And it's fair for both parties. And they know where they stand as well, right? Because you'll be surprised sometimes when clients are like, okay, so I originally agreed 10 days. It looks like it's 15. Maybe I can make it 12 days. So they refine it in themselves, because sometimes clients can just add for the sake of it. And that's not every client, of course not. But I think once you when they start to realize in their brain that, okay, we've got a ballpark that we have to work within, not just the designer, they're more inclined to refine their thinking as well, which is good, because no one wants to just be like, how long's a piece of string, right? So I think that's quite good. And that's kind of worked with me over the years as well. Hopefully that answers your question, Anika.
Yeah. Thanks, Anika. That's a good question. And Gabe, did you have a question, another one that you wanted to ask?
Yes, I did actually.
Go for
it. What if your client doesn't exactly meet your needs and you feel isn't exactly working with you in the way that you were hoping? What would you do then?
That's a good question. Do you know what? There's the one skill, I'll be very honest, I've learned the most being freelance is not even like a design skill, it's patience. It's actually patience, and that's no word of a lie. And I think for me, at that very initial early stage of a project, especially as a brand new client, I try to be very flexible, for the sheer fact that my goal has always been that we continue to work together, right? I'm your guy to be the freelance designer, we go back. And that's not to say you undercharge yourself when you do stuff that you wouldn't necessarily do. But what I mean by that is maybe that initial stage, they might need a bit more of a walking through the process at the initial stage. So we're talking for a project, and you know, if I can see they're struggling to read and understand the design process because it's their first time working with, say, a designer, if it's like a personal project, I should say, rather than a publisher or whatever, then there's a part of my brain that kind of switches on. Okay, Kieron, these guys, they need a bit more TLC, if you know what I mean. They need a bit more love and care in terms of how you walk them through the process. But also, if I'm being very honest with you, like the energy is quite important for me, which sounds like a bit of a weird thing to say, but it is important. And what I mean by that, and I'll use an example, because recently a client reached out to me, and it's a couple. It's a personal project, couple project, really lovely people. But I could see for what they need, it's just not in terms of they're just unsure what they need, if that makes sense. They know they need a logo, but they don't know what it's going to look like, and that's fine. We can walk it through. But I remember one of them said, and I won't say names because that's not professional, but they were like, when we see it, we're going to take so long to get back to you because we just won't know. And no designer wants to hear that, because you're like, well, that's cool, but there needs to be an end goal, right? Like I have other clients as well. You got to sustain yourself. And I think it's more being fair to not just yourself, but to them as well. And that might mean they might actually potentially, it might be better for them to have another designer who can develop, who can actually give more time to that person, if you know what I mean. So I guess I'm quite anal when it comes to working with timings and deadlines, because I juggle quite a few projects at once, and you kind of have to be, otherwise it just goes a bit mental. But with that client in particular, if I feel that the vibe's not well, rather than just saying, sorry, I don't want to work with you anymore, go somewhere else, I will very much, if you can't talk it through, like recommend either another designer, and at least that way they're still in the space of working with someone that they've been recommended or they know. And that's not to say that they will never come back to me ever again, but I guess it's more of a case of that particular project, it didn't align with both values. And I know it might sound a bit bold, a bit brave to even do that, but I think it's something that's quite important, because if you take a project on for the sake of it, just because it's money, okay, yeah, it's paid well, but is it worth the stress? Like, literally, is it worth the levels of stress? And you're freaking out, and they're the client from hell, and it's not good for anyone. So I to answer your question, Gabe, if the vibe is not there and we're just not work, and it just seems that they're going to be very difficult to work with, I try and cut my ties, if I'm honest with you, because it's just not worth the stress, or at least. Well, no, because I don't want to recommend them to someone else if they're also a nightmare from client from hell. What kind of person would I be? If like, yeah, don't work with me, but work with my mate Gary. I'm not that person, but I guess it's more other people might have more patience, maybe, or if they're struggling, or a friend of mine struggling to find any work, they'll take that on board because it's work coming their way. So I try and share it that way as well. I hope that answers your question.
I guess that's also, sorry, the importance of the proposal and the onboarding at the beginning, as you were saying, when you have that initial call and you follow up with an email, and in the quote, yes, you're not just talking about money, you're talking about time, and letting them know from the get-go that they need to give you feedback within a certain window of time if you're to meet your deadline that you're both working towards. Because if you're waiting for feedback for 2 weeks, that's eating into your time as well, isn't it? So I guess that's
that happens.
You can kind of cover yourself.
It happens so much as well, like more than I feel. Yeah, like I said, I'm still very much learning the life of freelance. Like I've been active in the space, and it's been a decent 2 years, but still very much learning as you go along. And the one thing, like I said, and generally being honest, Harry, is patience is the key, because you're you learn more about yourself and how to try and keep it 100 on a call with a client that's difficult. It can be difficult. Do you know what I mean? It can be hard. And especially clients who you can't just grab a coffee and meet up with. Like I said, a lot of my clients are based in the US, so time difference is a factor. Even culturally, the humor is different. Do you know what I mean? Like I've learned that more with working with clients abroad, and I like a bit of a joke in my briefings, and I like if basically put it this way, if we just had our very, very first initial meeting, if there's laughter in that call, we're good. Like we're in a good place. I feel like it doesn't feel like, obviously we're talking serious stuff. We're talking, price and all this stuff, of course. But are they generally a nice human being to want to work with? Do you know what I mean? Like that has to be those thoughts go through my head a lot, because I realize how much it's important that I'm in a good place of good mind space when I'm working as well. And if they're difficult, then yeah, fuck me, I don't want to be doing that. Excuse my language. Yeah, I don't want to be doing that. It'd just be very stressful, I think. And I'm sure everyone has examples of clients that are just the clients from hell, right? But then, yeah, there's always a silver lining, because you might find a client who's awesome. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt's got a great question, and then I'll come to you, Anita, afterwards. So Matt's asking, with regard to payment for projects, would you expect payment in stages or full payment at the end of the project?
That is a solid question. And you know what? So at the very beginning, I changed my ways. So to begin with, I would charge at the end, and that will be it. And then it was weird, because I started to realize that, and I'm just going to be very, very transparent and just lay all it out on this call. Obviously, at the very beginning, I had a few clients I had to work, Harper Collins, and it was great, and a few others as well. But sometimes there's a situation where if you're getting your invoices paid at the very end, sometimes that might take a long time to come through. And remember, you've got life situation. I mean, like I said, I just bought a place. At the time when I went freelance the first year, I was getting married as well. So I was trying to plan a wedding, mortgage, as well as freelance, multiple juggling things. And obviously everyone has life stuff happening. So sometimes you get a bit annoyed at the client, because even though they're doing what, they say to you, right, okay, we'll pay you at the end of the month because that's when it should be. A part of you is frustrated, maybe, because like it could be the first week in the month and you think, I need to wait how many weeks now but it's not their fault. It's the fact that obviously it doesn't align with what you might need to pay out, and that's just the life. So I changed how that operates. What I mean by that is and it's probably smart of me now to do it this way, is that I charge at the beginning and at the end. So half to start, half at the end, which works in both ways, because one, you have an incentive to get going, but well, you do have an incentive. Let's be honest, we need to work to make money, like we need to live. So there's that too. But also because they've paid half, if we're in a project, the chances are they're not going to want to just make it lang out for very, very long. Lang out, that's not a word. Just like stretch out for very, very long, because they need to, they've really paid you for one half. So they're going to want to finish the rest, and vice versa. You want to kind of, move into the next. So the ball's kind of been set once they've paid that first half. So that's how I operate now with all my clients, where we pay half. But to be fair, not all clients are like that, because some clients have their set ways. And I know of some publishers, for example, they don't operate in that way. They have a budget, they tell you what it is, and you kind of have to work within there. That's why editorial is a little bit tricky sometimes. But I would say 70% of my clients, they kind of abide by that rule that I kind of have, where I do 50% at the beginning and then after, and it works both sides. So I can't complain. Hopefully that answers your question, Matt.
Yeah, cool. And are you okay for a couple more minutes just to answer Anita's questions?
Of course.
Yeah.
Is it 8 o'clock already, Mike?
I know,
didn't
it's
realize the
gone
time.
too quick. Yeah.
No, I was just rambling on at you, and you're still here. I'm glad. I hope it's too poor. I didn't realize 8 o'clock. Crikey. Yeah.
Go for it, Anita. What's your question?
So I'm a final year student, and I'm leaning very heavily towards like publication and editorial. And I mean, as design students, like we see the projects that are, like interesting, and the ones that are like very inspiring, but kind of like looking at the industry and fields like advertising and publishing and branding, those three especially, at least in my perspective, a lot of the projects are very like standardized and similar and a little bit bland. And you kind of like every once in a while you find one that's like really interesting. So I was wondering, like, as a designer, both as a freelancer and also before you started freelance, like how much do you have to sift through the people who want your skill to be applied to that kind of like standardized design style, and like to find people who, actually want your creativity, so where you can like do a project that is like challenging and actually exciting?
That is a solid question. And you hit the nail on the head there, where you have to sift through loads of shit, basically, excuse my language. Like you kind of, I can't stress enough the importance of good communication. And what I mean by that, like I said, I am a sucker for meeting a client, if we can, obviously, for a coffee rather than a back and forth email, if we can, time winning, not all the time. But if not, then a good old Zoom call or whatever, video call, because I think the more, with my experience as freelance, even though it's very much new to me, I think I'm getting a better understanding of how people operate and how clients operate as well. And I think, I can kind of gauge in a solid hour chat, where this is kind of going and what their real intentions are. And I almost feel like halfway through that chat, I think I know if I want to work with them or not. I know that's a bit like, that's very quick to know that already, but everyone's different, right? And I think the more I do it, the more clients I work with and have briefings with, the better I get at asking questions or challenging or knowing what vibe they want. And yeah, you have to sift through a lot of rubbish to kind of get through when you get to. And to be honest, that's kind of why I left my full-time, not my previous full-time, but just in general, because I always got to that mark where I just got either really bored or I just struggled creatively. Like there was nothing to fulfill me. Do you know what I mean? You're just churning things out like a robot, which I'm sure everyone can relate to that for some jobs. And it's horrible, which is why it's important to do side projects, which I haven't even touched on that, but it's 8 o'clock. I want you guys to be like being bored to death. But I can't stress the importance of doing like side hustles or like, collaborative projects, because it kind of keeps your mind afloat creatively. So then it kind of feeds in then to your full-time or to your freelance, because then you feel a little bit more refreshed, basically, if I'm honest. You feel a bit more refreshed, you feel more revitalized. And I think the stuff you learn from doing these collaborative works, it ties in nicely, I think, into your freelance. A lot of stuff that I do, side projects, not as much as I used to, but definitely when I graduated from uni, when I was doing side hustles or I was connecting with other universities or collaborative work, that confidence that you build talking to different types of people, I've now applied it to different types of clients. Do you know what I mean? Because clients, when you deal with clients as well, it's a confidence thing as well, which doesn't come for everyone. Like I feel like it's one of those things that within time you get better at knowing yourself and you get better at understanding people, and that's something you can't rush that. Do you know what I mean? And you mentioned you're in your final year at uni as well, and I remember those days of what it was like, and it almost feels like Hunger Games a little bit when you graduate. It's like, now what do I do? Do you know what I mean? And I think it's the idea of first things first, congratulations being in the final year, because that is stressful as hell. And I remember what that was like. So like that in itself is a congrats. And I think the next part obviously is trying to look for, well, it depends what you want, looking for a job or freelance. But I think whilst if you're looking for a job and it's a struggle, try and keep yourself creatively afloat. And that might mean, like I said, going to events, doing things, collaborating. And before you know it, people pay attention on social media, and that stuff, it leads into potential work, honestly. I can't stress enough, just very quickly, I can't stress enough, even when I was doing my side hustle jobs, and a lot of people that have now reached out because of stuff on my website, which is not even client work, but stuff that I did with friends or collaborative, which has kind of paid off in terms of now working with different types of clients. So you never know where things will lead after a period of time if you just keep proactive on that front. That was very long-winded, but I hope that answers your question.
I think I just want to point out as well, like something that you were telling me about when we had a chat before this was, in a way, like sometimes getting those bread and butter clients. So you were saying about editorial pieces, like reports are really good to kind of get into when you're starting out for the money.
Yes.
And then use your side hustle projects, your self-initiated projects as the creative stuff to get you the creative work.
So
to
true.
Take the burden off of the financial and creative straight away.
So true.
Yeah.
No one, I don't want to say no one likes annual reports, but I generally like annual reports. I mean, I sound like a weirdo, right? But I think, because you mentioned as well, I think the last person saying that they want to get into editorial, like annual reports is something that a lot of agencies will need, right? And it isn't the most sexiest of jobs, because let's be honest, there's a lot of numbers, and to be fair, you make it not. I always say, like, especially if a client that reaches out to me, and they always sometimes throw at me like, oh, we've got an annual report, but it's quite boring, I know, and you know, like it. I'm like, first things first, you don't lead with that, because that doesn't really put much optimism in when we're like saying it's boring. But I always try and turn it back around, be more positive, and say, you know, well, actually, you've come to me because you've got all this content, you're trying to make it more digestible for anyone who's reading it in a visual way. So I would much rather have a real nitty-gritty discussion with you. And if it's an annual report of, I don't know, say 90 pages, if we make it 120 pages, just so things are more breathable, can we do that? You know what I mean? Like, can we go bigger on certain things just so it doesn't feel like it's so condensed? And usually, sometimes they're up for it. I mean, usually it depends on if it's going to be printed or if it's online or whatever. But that's what I kind of mean about challenging the clients and having these discussions with them, because when you have that with them, then they're more willing to kind of be more flexible, and then everything's kind of laid out, everything's more transparent, and hopefully some good stuff together. But those projects and reports, they're boring, but they need to be done. Someone needs to do them, right? So yeah. Yeah.
Have we got time for one more from Margot?
We've got time. We can squeeze it in. All good.
Go for it, Margot.
Okay, thank you. So I actually fall in line more of the photo and video world, but I've been starting to do more design because just trying to do more as a freelance. I actually can relate. I'm gonna help like Kieron.
Yeah, that's all right, Kieron. Yeah, you're good for it.
Yeah, and so I just left my full-time corporate creativity job because I was not being fulfilled and it was boring and I was getting burnt out because it wasn't what I was wanting to do. Mainly because I wasn't doing, I mean, I do weddings on the side, but I wasn't like really being creative on the side. And I was like, I got to get out of here. And so I just now started freelance. But one thing that I had a question about was, I know you said patience is a huge thing, but I still wanted to ask like how you face burnout when trying to establish your worth and just keep hitting rejection after rejection after rejection.
Do you know what? Let's be honest, there is no definitive answer. It's shit, right? It's horrible. It's a horrible experience. I think it's something that it's tricky, because I always think to myself, like, you've got to be proactive in this space, right? Whether you want to be, I mean, you don't have, well, people get by. If they get by, that's totally cool. But I think in particular with freelance, and if anyone is freelancing or want to go into freelance, the one thing I always say is you have to be free. You got to be proactive, and that will come with a lot of rejection. And it's easy for me to say, okay, you know, name dropping these clients like Harper Collins or whatever, and then say, oh yeah, rejection's okay. I get that, because, you know, I've been in the industry for a while. But I can honestly say that all of these clients I work with now never would have approached, I don't think so anyway, unless it was for those kind of like side hustles that I was doing, and showing how proactive I am in the space, right? And, you know, them reaching out via social media because of something I might have posted out, you know, when I was working with friends together on projects. So I think you're going to have to go through a lot of those shitty moments. But the one thing I would say is that it's a real test of your character, to be honest, as well. I think that idea of, not necessarily it's rejection, but it's more, you can question sometimes why they haven't, I mean, it depends whether they get back to you, of course not, but sometimes it's going to be good to know why they haven't approached you. So if it's, say, for example, it's a job you're looking for, nothing worse than just saying, sorry, you haven't got it, or not even hearing back from them, right? I think if they're willing to kind of like give you a rationale, or you'll want to know, then it's good for you, because then you know how you can then, you know, go forward and move on. So don't be afraid to kind of pick their brains and question them. I think more so if you get rejected, but you're like, you know what have I got to lose, right? You've got absolutely nothing to lose. You know, like, okay, screw them, but at least that way, you know, moving forward, what is something that you've done, or something in your portfolio or whatever. Like, I think there's ways of how you can go about around it, and it's basically trying to turn a negative into a positive, really. But yeah, there's no beating the fact that it's gonna feel shit and it's horrible. But the positive is that the more proactive you are, more doors will generally open up. They have to. I believe in that. They have to. So yeah. If not, break down the doors instead. If don't, just wait for doors to open up. Just break them down. Sledgehammer style. Yeah.
I think, as you said before as well, like talking to other freelancers and other creatives, and kind of building that network amongst other creatives, so that you've got kind of a group ear to the ground on projects, and doing the self-initiated stuff as well.
It's super important. When I give talks at schools and unis and colleges, like, I can't, because you remember, these guys are younger than us. Well, it depends, I can't tell who's on the chat, but most likely they're younger than us because they're in school still and they're just starting out. And you know, it's important that I go back and share experiences, but not just the good ones and say, oh, look at the book I made or whatever. It's the things that went to shit, like, within reason, of course, because they're like 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds. But what I mean is, when I tell them about experiences that weren't so sharp or so good that I learned for it, hopefully that gives them an idea of what we can kind of look out for, those kind of potholes or danger, I should say. And that's the thing, sharing experiences is so important. I have been to many talks where, you know, it's all good coming there and you guys zooming in and watching my work and saying, oh yeah, I made that. But that's cool. But surely you want to know about what went wrong, or like, you know, what made you struggle? What was the, do you know what I mean? That makes you more human. Like, if you show, and that's not for everyone, because that kind of shows the vulnerable side of who you are as well sometimes. Do you know what I mean? But luckily for me, you guys, I don't sometimes care that much, in the sense where I'm kind of comfortable in my own body and skin, that I can share experiences with you guys. And, you know, even though I can't see you guys, I just see names, I still feel like there's a connection anyway. So yeah, it's all good. Hopefully on that front. Yeah,
absolutely. I can say myself as well, like, yeah, rejection, imposter syndrome.
It's normal. We all get it.
Yeah, everyone all throughout your career as well. It doesn't just, it's not just something that happens when you first get started at all. It will kind of, it
but
really
even like
head, doesn't it? So,
but even like the most seasoned pros, the most seasoned, like, or like established creatives, of course they're amazing, and they've probably done loads of things or whatever, but they've gone, I would love to know some real bad stuff that went wrong on their journey, because they must have been a few. Like, there's no one, I don't believe in that anyway. I generally believe, but the difference is that on social media you don't ever show. Why would you show that? Because it's the bad side. Do you know what I mean? And like I said, it'd be a hypocrite on my part if I said, you know, we all do the same. I put my best work online because that's what you want people to know, of course. But it's meetings like this, or going to talks, where you can be a bit more just honest and be open about it, and just actually have a conversation. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to put on my LinkedIn, oh yeah, Kieron fucked up on a project, excuse my language. I'd rather have a discussion on Zoom and explain to you why that went wrong, rather than publicly. Do you know what I mean? But when you have these events and these chats, I think it's important to pick the brains of people, you know, who are in the industry and know what works for them and what doesn't work for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's real life at the end of the day, and that's what, you know, that's what I want Tern heads to kind of bring to the table, is that that peek behind the curtain when things do go wrong, and, you know, those quiet weeks where you haven't got any work on, and, you know, you're worrying and things like that. But, you know, how do you get out of that? How did you manage it? How did you
loads of Netflix, Sam. Loads of Netflix, Sam, and just like no, what keeps me saying, like, my PlayStation. No, but no, I know what you mean. And it's something that, like I said, I think also barring and I'll sort of, you know, close up soon, because I don't want you guys to get bored of this, but I think barring the patience that I mentioned, that's super important. I think also as well, it's oh, my mind's gone completely blank now. What was I going to say? Barring patience, it's I've got completely blank now. What was I going to say, Sam? I completely forgot. Actually, I was going to say patience and a few other qualities anyway. Probably be a bit of memory.
Resilience.
Yeah, actually, that was it. I think it's the idea as well of just knowing when to just take a step back as well. Take a step back, you know, away from the computer, get out of the house. For your sanity, as a freelancer, as a human being, you need to step away from the desk, because we're creatives. We spend a lot of time designing. We overthink things. We worry. I'm the king of worrying, right? We all do it. And I think with freelancing, that's been a good lesson in knowing when you need to stop and chill and have that down, and almost have a line between social and work, because when you're freelancing, it merges a bit. When you're full-time, you're like Monday to Friday, it's cool, go pub on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, chill. But when you're freelance, it's so easy that, oh, okay, I'll work on Sunday so that I have Monday off. Do you know what I mean? Like, you find ways of making it, and that's fine if it works for you. But I think you become like one with the self, but you know yourself a lot better when you're doing freelance, because you know what you can do and what you can't do, and you kind of just ride that wave as you go along.
Yeah, absolutely. Margot's saying when you have files saved as shit drafts final project.
Yes, he knows. Yeah,
Totally relate to that.
So, yeah. So do you know what it is? It's funny enough, I have to I can't do it that way anymore, and I think it's not me trying to, I'm being Mr. Perfect, but because I send a lot of files sometimes to the clients. Can you imagine the client getting this like from Kieron, like, you know, file 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Thursday? Like, it'd be horrible. They'll never come back to me ever again. So I always think to myself, like, if I was a designer on another end receiving this file, would I want this horrible, like, unlayered, just like a stick in a dump sort of style work? I don't want that for anyone. So I try and think about the other person a little bit more. So my brain's like, no, Kieron, layer it, color code it. Anika knows I'm on about, because she likes to color code and save her work. There we go, because I know her personally. But yeah, I think everyone has their own way of working. So yeah, just streamline is important.
You got to be considerate of the person you're sending the file on to that's going to deal with it when they open it, for sure. Don't
be that person, guys. I'm thinking, yeah, I've done my job. That's their job. No. Be nice. Be nice. And it will come. I promise you, the karma will come back to you tenfold. There we go.
Don't be a one-layer Dave. For sure.
One layer Dave. If you don't take anything from tonight, guys, just remember that one layer Dave. That meme. Nice.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Kieron. Are there any last questions before we go?
Right out there, no question.
Oh yeah, Anita, go for it.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about so like the 2 designers that I know that work in publishing went through like a literary agent. And I wanted to ask if that's something you considered, like being represented by a literary agent to push your work to publishers.
That is interesting. Do you know what? Honest to God, it's never gone through my mind, actually. And I think more so because when I graduated, 11 years ago, I was dying to work in publishing, and I ended up working in advertising loads. And I think those side things I mentioned, those side hustles and collaborative projects, they were all editorial. So I kind of knew that eventually I will hopefully get into editorial, just based on the fact that I'm keeping proactive and doing stuff on the side. But I never thought of having someone to represent me or a publisher like that. I think it's more little, either basically sliding into DMs or creative directors on LinkedIn, like finding LinkedIn, finding out who's a CD of, whatever publisher, dropping them a message, now and again, just to kind of share some work. But I never thought to go around that way. But to be fair, that could also work as well. I think if that works for you, that's just another outlet. I think at that early stage when you're kind of just starting out, you can, but I think it's good to have all options open on the table, right? And having publishers could work. One thing I definitely did do was I was linked up with recruiters basically. So I worked with a few recruiters to try and find some work, and that definitely helped. A bit annoying sometimes because they just completely bombard you once they've got their claws in you. They bombard you, and obviously that's their job, right? And it did help, to be fair, a fair bit. But yeah, like now I work for myself, so I it's I don't do that. But who knows? One day I may have to do it that way, and who knows? So yeah, if it works for you, it works for you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. It's been really, really good chat, and thank you so much, Kieron. There's so many nuggets in there for everybody. Whether you're wanting to go freelance or not, like even full-time work, like there's so many relevant points, like exactly the same with working with clients and dealing with stress and projects and everything. So thank you. Some amazing advice in there.
My pleasure.
So yeah, thanks again everyone for coming along. Do check out Turnheads. I've also put Kieron's links in there as well if you want to follow him on LinkedIn and Instagram. Have a look at his work on there. Do join the Turnheads community as well on social media for sure, and continue asking any other questions that you want to know. Please just, send it over and we'll be happy to answer it for you. And best of luck with your career paths in the future. And we'll see you at the next one.
And also, thank you, Sam, as well, for hosting. Like, can we do like a little emoji on the clap, guys? I don't know, just also for seconds. I feel like even setting this up takes a lot of time. So thanks. Like Sam and I know each other on a personal level, but again, it's also awesome to collaborate with everybody. So thanks for setting this up, man. So,
you're more than welcome. And the creative industry is a fantastic industry to work in. So I really, really want you guys to succeed. And just share your stories and help each other.
Yeah. And you've got this. Right. Yeah, have a good week. Have a good week, guys. See you soon.
Have a good week.
Ciao.
Bye.